A child walks along a curved corridor beneath pipes marked with labels she has known since she learned to read. Between them are old mission plaques carrying the names of people who left Earth centuries before she was born. The adults still describe the ship as being on a voyage, but that word would mean something different to her. She has never felt wind, stood beneath an open sky, or lived anywhere without a hull surrounding her. It is home. A journey to Proxima Centauri could last for centuries, which means the people who designed the ship and chose its destination would be gone long before it arrived. Their children would inherit the mission, followed by generations who knew Earth only through recordings, lessons, and family stories. Keeping them alive would require extraordinary engineering. The air and water would have to circulate through closed systems. The farms would have to keep producing food, and machines built on Earth would need to remain repairable long after their designers were gone. But the machinery would only survive if the society around it survived as well. Each generation would need to learn inherited skills, maintain old systems, and accept limits created by a mission that began before anyone alive could remember it. People would still need ways to raise families, settle disputes, replace leaders, and resolve conflicts between the ship's needs and their own. And over enough time, even the purpose of the voyage could begin to change. The destination might remain fixed in the navigation system, while its meaning slowly faded from everyday life. Earth would become history, the founders would become names on plaques, and the ship itself would become the only world its people had ever known. No human society has faced that exact burden. We do not know whether knowledge, legitimacy, and shared purpose could be renewed for centuries inside one sealed machine. So what kind of society could survive aboard a generation ship? And what would happen when the people maintaining the mission no longer felt that it belonged to them? By the end of this video, we will follow how population, education, family life, and authority could shape a civilization traveling between stars, and why preserving the society may prove just as difficult as preserving the ship. If you enjoy exploring questions like this with me, subscribing helps others find them too. Liking and sharing the video helps even more. Now, let's begin. You may still be carrying a familiar kind of crew in your head. They leave Earth together, grow older together, and arrive with memories of the day they launched. That works for voyages measured in months or years. It fails long before a ship reaches even the nearest star. Proxima Centauri is about 4.24 light-years away. That is roughly 25 trillion miles, or 40 trillion kilometers. Light crosses that distance in a little more than 4 years. A worldship would be nowhere near that fast. Suppose it could travel at 1% of light speed. That is about 1,864 miles per second, or 3,000 kilometers per second. It sounds almost impossible because it is. No safe worldship has ever approached anything close to it. Even at that speed, the crossing takes about 424 years. That does not include the time needed to speed up and slow down. The people who watched Earth shrink behind them would be gone. Their children would be gone. So would their grandchildren, and probably several generations after that. The ship-born child from earlier might grow old hearing launch stories from someone who heard them second-hand. A century later, those stories would come from recordings. After 2 centuries, Earth would be a place in lessons, archives, family names, and arguments over what the founders intended. Now take a slower model. Some studies use a cruise speed near 200 kilometers per second, about 124 miles per second. That is still far beyond any crewed spacecraft we have built. Yet at that speed, one modeled trip to Proxima stretches to roughly 6,300 years. 6,300 years is not a long expedition. It is longer than the span from the first cities of ancient Mesopotamia to your evening tonight. No captain could carry orders across that gap. No founding council could explain itself to the people who arrive. Even the original language might change until old instructions need translation. This is where time becomes part of the ship's machinery. Engines may keep it moving, but succession keeps it alive. Someone must teach children how the air system works. Someone must decide who repairs the water supply, who receives scarce medicine, and what happens when two groups disagree. Those jobs cannot wait for Earth to answer. Earth's reply might arrive years later, after the problem and the people involved had already changed. A mission patch might still hang beside a classroom. The children beneath it could name oceans they have never seen and trace continents on a diagram. Then class ends, and they return to tending machines designed by ancestors no living person has met. For them, Earth would be history, while the ship would be home. There is no proof that a world ship could safely reach 1% of light speed. There is no proof that the slower design could remain habitable for 6,300 years either. These numbers do not choose an engine or settle the design. They show the kind of time the design must survive. Once living memory of launch disappears, founder authority becomes a record that later generations may honor, reinterpret, or reject. The voyage no longer belongs to the people who began it. It belongs to people born inside a system they did not choose, maintaining a destination they know only through inherited evidence. So a world ship cannot be defined as a spacecraft with extra food and more beds. Over centuries, it must become a city that repairs itself, a school that preserves difficult knowledge, and a state that can transfer power without tearing the mission apart. You may still see the ship as a transport container, with a society fitted inside it afterward. Engines below, people above. But once a shipborne child can grow old without reaching the destination, that separation stops making sense. The corridors now open into classrooms, workshops, kitchens, clinics, and council rooms. All of them sit under the same hull. A classroom teaches someone how to repair the air system 30 years later. A workshop passes along skills that may not be needed for a generation. A council decides who gets scarce materials, who does dangerous work, and what happens when people refuse. Those aren't extra services attached to the spacecraft. They're parts of how the spacecraft continues to work. The physicist Robert Hine used the idea of a world ship for voyages so long that the traveling society becomes a world of its own. That framing changes the design problem. Maintenance is no longer just a set of manuals. It depends on education, trust, shared habits, and the transfer of authority. Cultural continuity becomes an engineering category because knowledge must survive through people. Consider one damaged pump. The ship needs someone who can diagnose it, someone who can make a replacement part, and someone who understands the wider water system. It also needs a school that trained them. It needs records they can read. It needs enough public trust for water limits to be accepted while repairs are underway. If that trust breaks, the pump is no longer the only failure. People may hide supplies, ignore rationing, or fight over access. A political failure has entered the plumbing. The same link runs through almost every system aboard. Farming depends on cooperation between growers, chemists, technicians, and whoever sets the rules for shared land. Medicine depends on trained staff, stored knowledge, and decisions about limited treatment. Navigation depends on specialists whose work must remain trusted by people who never saw Earth and may never see the New World. This makes legitimacy as practical as wiring. People don't have to agree about everything. Cities never do. But they need accepted ways to settle disputes, replace leaders, correct bad decisions, and protect people from arbitrary power. Otherwise, every serious disagreement can spread into maintenance, food, education, or life support. No research paper can prove which form of government would survive such a voyage. A council might work, so might elected offices, rotating duties, courts, or arrangements nobody has tried on Earth. The evidence doesn't select a constitution for us. It only removes the option of having none. And the founders can't simply freeze their own rules in place. Later generations will face failures the founders never saw. They'll develop customs that fit life aboard. They may challenge the mission itself. A government that cannot change may crack under that pressure. One that changes without limits may abandon duties the ship still depends on. So the society inside the hull is a practical system. It carries skills across generations. It distributes work. It decides whose judgment counts. It gives children reasons to learn tasks chosen long before they were born. That system also needs depth. One doctor is a person. Several doctors of different ages are a medical tradition. One engineer is expertise. A workshop full of apprentices is continuity. The city survives only when enough people can teach, replace, disagree with, and support one another. A world ship, therefore, needs more than a population large enough to reproduce. It needs enough people, and enough overlapping roles, to keep an entire city alive when any one person is gone. A spreadsheet can make 98 people look surprisingly convincing. There are enough names to form families, enough ages to span generations, and enough careful planning to avoid the most obvious genetic traps. That number comes from work by Frédéric Marin and Camille Beloufi. They modelled a crew travelling for thousands of years and asked how few settlers might arrive with a genetically healthy population. Their answer was 98, under a conservative version of the model. But the model's settlers don't simply pair off as they please. Reproduction follows adaptive rules. The system limits close relatives from having children together. It also controls when people reproduce and how many children they have. Those rules preserve genetic diversity across many generations. So 98 isn't a passenger list. It's a lower boundary inside a controlled experiment. You can feel the difference as soon as the names acquire jobs. Delete one medic. Delete the only machinist who knows a certain pump. Remove a midwife, then the person training to replace her. The family tree may still work while the labour roster begins to collapse. A lower bound model asks whether a population crosses one failure line. A real ship has many lines. People get injured, equipment fails in combinations nobody predicted. A generation may reject the reproductive rules. A dispute may split a workshop into people who no longer trust one another. Genetic survival doesn't repair an air scrubber or settle a fight over scarce medicine. This is why conservation geneticists often care about effective population size. That isn't simply the number of people present. It describes how many are actually contributing genes to later generations, and how evenly they do it. A ship could carry several hundred people while illness, infertility, age structure, or social divisions make its effective population much smaller. The same problem appears in work. 3 engineers may sound like redundancy, until all 3 learned from the same teacher and share the same blind spot. 10 doctors may still leave one surgical specialty resting on a single pair of hands. Resilience comes from overlap, different training paths, spare capacity, and enough younger people learning before older experts disappear. Marin and Beloufi did not claim that 98 people could absorb every accident, political fracture, or lost profession aboard a real vessel. Their result answers a narrower question. Under strict reproductive management, how small might the founding group be without genetic collapse? That's valuable. It tells us where one cliff may begin. It doesn't tell us how far back from the cliff a civilization should live. The family tree asks whether descendants can remain genetically healthy. The labour roster asks whether those descendants can still run the ship, and the number that protects one may be far too small to protect the other. A passenger list can tell you how many people are aboard. It cannot tell you how many of them are carrying distinct genetic options into the future. Those numbers may look similar at departure. Over several generations, they can pull far apart. Geneticists call the thinner number the effective population size. It counts the people who actually contribute genes to later generations, adjusted for how reproduction really happens. Some adults may never have children, some may have many. There may be too few people of one sex, long gaps between age groups, or whole family lines that end early. 500 living passengers might therefore behave genetically like a much smaller population. You can see the problem in a family tree. At first, the branches spread freely. Then one large family supplies a bigger share of the next generation. Another family has no children. A disease removes several related people. The red lines begin to cross. Soon, 2 young adults who seem unrelated on the daily roster share more ancestors than anyone planned. That is why the figure of 98 settlers needs a careful label. It came from a model with strict assumptions about pairing, fertility, family size, and reproductive management. It was a lower bound for avoiding one kind of genetic failure, It was never a comfortable passenger target for a real ship full of illness, preference, bad luck, and people who may object to having their partners assigned by software. Conservation geneticist Richard Frankham and his colleagues revised an older rule used for small populations. The old guide aimed for an effective population of about 50 to limit inbreeding over the short term, and 500 to preserve evolutionary capacity over the long term. The revised guide raised those figures to roughly 101,000. That does not mean a starship needs exactly 1,000 passengers. Effective population is not the passenger count. To reach an effective population near 1,000, the actual census could need to be much larger. The gap depends on age structure, fertility, sex balance, family size, and plain chance. The figures are warning lines, not tickets ready for printing. The reason for extra room is simple. Inbreeding can expose harmful gene variants when relatives have children together. Genetic drift can also remove variants at random, even when no one is visibly sick. A closed population cannot easily replace what it loses. There is no neighboring settlement to add new families later. So biology needs spare capacity, much as the ship's machinery does. Enough family lines must remain available when accidents and choices narrow the pedigree. And once the manifest grows for that reason, another problem appears. Those people cannot be interchangeable names in a gene bank. They must also keep the farms, reactors, clinics, schools, and workshops running when a trained person is suddenly gone. A watch rota can look reassuring until you count the boxes. There's a doctor on Monday, a farmer on Tuesday, an engineer overnight, and one gifted family somehow covering everything else. It works perfectly, right up to the first broken wrist, difficult birth, failed crop, or argument. A settlement cannot depend on one person who knows how to do each life support job. If the only surgeon becomes ill, medical care cannot wait. If the best farmer dies, everyone still needs food. The same is true of maintenance, education, childcare, and governance. These jobs happen at the same time. They also continue while people sleep, grieve, recover, raise families, and grow old. Engineers use something called RAID to protect stored data. The basic idea is simple. You spread the work across several drives, so one failure does not erase everything. A generation ship needs a social version of that. Several people must know every critical system. Their skills must overlap enough that someone can step in tomorrow. That means more than training 2 doctors instead of 1. Medical care includes surgery, infection control, dentistry, pregnancy, mental health, and ordinary injuries. Farming means seeds, soil, water chemistry, pests, harvests, and food storage. Maintenance covers machines that may have been built before the current crew was born. Then there are the roles that don't come with a toolbox. Someone has to teach children what the ship knows. Someone has to care for those children while their parents work. People must settle disputes, make rules, replace poor leaders, and decide what happens when resources run short. Governance is infrastructure too. A community can lose power through a broken cable. It can also lose order through a decision nobody accepts. This is why the famous figure of 98 settlers can mislead. It came from a narrow model with strict assumptions. It helps show how a small population might avoid certain genetic problems. It does not prove that 98 people could operate a world for centuries. Studies of larger world ships, including work discussed by Andreas Hein and his colleagues, often frame the population in the thousands once wider risks are considered. There is no published calculation that gives us one final sacred crew size. Different ships, technologies, stored embryos, training systems, and failure rates would change the answer. But the staffing logic does not change. Tomorrow depends on who can step in when someone is gone. And even if the ship carries enough people, with enough overlapping skills, it still faces a more intimate limit. Those people must have children safely, generation after generation, while the ship is moving. It's tempting to treat pregnancy as something that will happen naturally once adults can eat, sleep, and work aboard the ship. But keeping a grown body healthy does not tell us whether a new body can develop safely from its first few cells. Human evidence here is very thin. No human pregnancy has been carried from conception through birth in space. We have data from astronauts, cells, animal studies and experiments that examine parts of reproduction. Most of that evidence is indirect. It can warn us about possible risks. It cannot show that pregnancy in a space habitat is an established medical routine. That difference changes the design of the ship. An obstetrics bay would sit inside the same physical system as everything else. Around it would be shielding mass, spinning structures, power lines, life support and emergency equipment. The room might look familiar. The conditions around it would not be. Early development depends on careful timing. An embryo must implant. Cells must divide, move and organize. Blood vessels must form. Organs must grow in the right sequence. Radiation could damage cells during stages when a small error has a large effect. Altered gravity may affect fluids, bones, muscles, balance systems, and the signals that help developing tissues arrange themselves. Animal studies give researchers reasons to pay attention to these risks, but animals are not small stand-ins for human pregnancy. Species develop at different speeds, their placentas differ, their responses to radiation and altered gravity differ too. A result in mice may identify a concern without telling doctors where the safe human threshold lies. And birth is only one boundary. A newborn must breathe, feed, regulate body temperature, fight infection, and continue rapid brain and bone development. Neonatal care already depends on specialized staff and equipment on Earth. On a ship, there is no larger hospital down the road. There may not even be another obstetrician awake. So, fertility planning becomes part of mission operations. The ship must decide when pregnancies are medically safer, how many can be supported at once, and what care is available if something goes wrong. Those decisions reach into privacy, consent, family life, and authority. An ordinary hope becomes an engineering review, which is an awkward burden to place on any family. None of this proves that humans cannot reproduce under artificial gravity and good shielding. It proves that we have not demonstrated that they can. The next generation cannot remain background biology. It is the mission itself, beginning at a stage of life that may be especially sensitive to gravity and radiation. The practical task is finding how much protection and how much gravity developing bodies actually need. Space is dangerous sounds like a warning you could answer with careful doctors and better equipment. But reproduction turns that warning into a set of limits we haven't measured yet. A healthy adult can tolerate a condition that may affect an embryo, a fetus, or a newborn in a very different way. The two main pressures are microgravity and radiation. Microgravity changes how fluids move, how bones take on load, and how organs develop their shape. Radiation can damage cells, and early development involves cells dividing very quickly. We know both pressures deserve caution. We don't yet have final safe numbers for every stage, from implantation through birth and early infancy. That changes the ship. A rotating habitat could provide artificial gravity, but the nursery can't simply go wherever there's spare floor space. Engineers would need to know how much gravity developing bodies require. Is a fraction of Earth's gravity enough? Does it need to stay steady? Could brief interruptions be harmless, or would timing matter? Until those limits are tested, rotation is more than a comfort feature for adults. It becomes part of reproductive medicine. Shielding works the same way. Think of a garden surrounded by thick stone walls. The plants at the center receive more protection than anything near the outer edge. A ship might place its nursery ring deep inside the hull, with water tanks, food stores, equipment, and other mass stacked around it. Every extra layer helps block radiation, but every layer also adds weight that must be launched, moved, and maintained. So the safest place for children may also be the most expensive part of the ship. Birth rooms, neonatal care, emergency surgery, stored medicines, and life support backups would all compete for that protected space. Fertility care would need protection too, because eggs, sperm, embryos, and developing tissue may not share the same limits as adult bodies. This is the difference between keeping adults alive and founding a lineage. Survival can be measured over a shift, a year, or a mission. Development has to work across the whole chain, with no hidden injury appearing years later in the children who inherit the voyage. And because the biology remains uncertain, the ship can't rely on medical checklists alone. It must decide who may use the safest spaces, when pregnancies can safely begin, how evidence changes those rules, and who has authority when private choices affect a shared survival system. The ship is deciding where children can begin. Before long, it is also deciding how. Most of us treat reproduction as part of private family life. On a ship it still is. But every pregnancy also depends on rooms, machines, staff, and supplies that everyone shares. A prenatal scan might happen beside the same corridor used for water maintenance and power checks. That sounds oddly ordinary. It should. The equipment keeping one pregnancy safe belongs to the same working system that keeps the air breathable and the lights on. Care would begin before conception. Doctors would need preconception monitoring to track radiation exposure, medicines, nutrition, fertility, and family medical history. No single measurement could guarantee a safe pregnancy. The evidence from space remains too thin for that. Monitoring would reduce avoidable risks and help the crew learn where the limits may be. Then comes obstetrics. A pregnancy can require imaging, laboratory work, emergency surgery, blood products, pain relief, and weeks of specialized attention. On Earth, a difficult case can be transferred to another hospital. A ship has no other hospital. If several pregnancies overlap, they may compete for the same clinicians, protected rooms, and medical supplies. Birth isn't the end of that demand. Neonatal care needs its own trained staff and equipment. A premature baby may require controlled warmth, breathing support, careful feeding, infection control, and constant observation. Those needs can continue for weeks. Even a healthy newborn changes food use, water use, sleeping space, and the workload carried by other adults. So fertility policy becomes infrastructure too. The crew needs a trusted way to decide how medical advice is given, how scarce care is scheduled, and what happens when resources are already strained. It also needs rules for privacy, consent, appeals, and protection from favoritism. Otherwise, a medical limit can turn into a social wound that lasts for generations. That doesn't require one belief about family, parenthood, or personal freedom. Different communities could make different choices, but no community can pretend the consequences stop at the cabin door. Every planned birth draws on shared protection. Every emergency rearranges shared labor. Every child enters a system that must support them for decades. The aim isn't control for its own sake, it's care under severe limits, especially when nobody knows the exact safe threshold. A trusted process can change as evidence grows. It can protect families without treating them as equipment, and protect children without making promises the medicine can't support. Fragile bodies make shared systems more important, not less. Pregnancy reveals that clearly. But the same rule reaches far beyond the clinic, into the water, food, air, heat, waste, and power loops that hold every generation alive. The water on the International Space Station can pass through a human body, collect as moisture on a cabin wall, and return to a drinking pouch. That sounds very close to a closed world. NASA's earlier life support system recovered about 93 to 94% of the station's water. In 2023, an improved system reached a milestone of 98%. That includes moisture from breathing and sweat, along with water recovered from urine. It's a major engineering achievement. For every 100 gallons used, about 98 gallons can be recovered. But recovery and closure aren't the same thing. Think of a kitchen where nearly every scrap becomes another meal. That reduces the groceries you need. It doesn't mean the kitchen can run forever. Knives dull, seals crack, pipes collect residue. Someone still has to clean, measure, repair, and notice when yesterday's harmless change becomes tomorrow's bad smell. The station works the same way. Condensation gathers on pipes, but those pipes still depend on filters, valves, sensors, pumps, replacement parts, and expert hands. Equipment comes up from Earth. Specialists on the ground watch the numbers, Astronauts perform maintenance. When the chemistry drifts, people intervene. So 98% recovery proves that a small crew can reuse water with remarkable efficiency. It doesn't prove that a ship can keep the entire loop stable for centuries without resupply or outside help. Even a loss of 2% becomes serious when it continues long enough. Near perfect can still run dry. Air brings the same problem. Carbon dioxide can be removed, oxygen can be restored, trace chemicals can be filtered. Yet every process is tied to other processes, and those links can behave in ways nobody planned. Biosphere 2 made that awkwardly clear in the early 1990s. 8 people entered a sealed complex in Arizona, surrounded by crops, soil, water, and a carefully designed atmosphere. The system was meant to recycle what they needed, but oxygen fell. Microbes in the rich soil consumed more oxygen than expected. Some carbon dioxide reacted with the building's concrete, hiding part of the signal that might otherwise have warned the crew sooner. Insects and plants changed the ecology as well. Nothing had to fail all at once. The system drifted because biology, chemistry, and machinery were connected. A generation ship would carry those same kinds of connections multiplied across decades. Its people would breathe into the farm would feed the waste system would alter the water would pass through machinery maintained by people who also depend on it. A percentage can tell you how much came back today. It cannot tell you whether all those hidden couplings will remain stable through the lives of people who haven't been born yet. A sealed greenhouse can look perfectly healthy while its air becomes dangerous. The glass may hold, the pipes may run. Yet every breath inside can still move the system somewhere nobody intended. NASA can recover most of the water used aboard a spacecraft. Sweat, moisture from breath, and urine can be cleaned and returned to the crew. That achievement is remarkable. But recovery is not the same as closure. Getting water back today doesn't guarantee that the whole living system will stay balanced for years. Biosphere 2 made that difference hard to ignore. Its enormous glass enclosure in Arizona had an impressively low leak rate. Very little outside air was getting in. By the obvious measure, the shell was doing its job. Inside, though, the oxygen was falling. It began near 20.9%, close to ordinary air. After 16 months, it had dropped to about 14.5%. That's like breathing at a high mountain settlement while standing on the ground in Arizona. The change was slow enough to become part of daily life before its full meaning was clear. The missing oxygen had not simply escaped through bad seals. Microbes in the rich soil consumed oxygen as they broke down organic material. Carbon dioxide from that process reacted with exposed concrete, which absorbed some of it. That masked part of the warning. The instruments did not show one clean exchange. They showed the combined result of soil, microbes, crops, people, and building materials doing chemistry together. Biosphere 2 was an analog, not a Starship test. It doesn't show that every system using plants and microbes must fail. It shows why engineers cannot treat a closed habitat like a larger water bottle with a tighter cap. A living enclosure keeps changing from within. And you would feel that change in your own lungs. If oxygen begins slipping, someone has to decide what happens next. Do you alter the soil, remove crops, reduce physical work, add stored oxygen? Each choice protects one part of the system while disturbing another. Those choices would never be purely technical aboard a generation ship. One group might accept lower oxygen to protect food production. Another might demand that stored reserves be opened now. People doing strenuous repairs would experience the risk differently from people resting in their quarters. Children, older passengers, and anyone who is ill would carry more of the cost. So life support becomes a shared political system as well as a machine. Its rules decide whose work continues, whose comfort shrinks, and when a reserve belongs to the people alive now, or those who will need it later, every person aboard would breathe the result of maintenance choices made by everyone else. A life support dashboard might look like something only an engineer should worry about. On a world ship, it would belong beside the town meeting, because every line on that screen would describe something the whole town shares. NASA already recovers most of the water used aboard the International Space Station. Sweat, moisture from breath, and wastewater can all return to the crew as clean drinking water. But recovery isn't the same as perfect closure. Filters wear out, pumps fail, sensors drift, pipes collect films of living material. A replacement part that seems minor can become the most important object aboard. Biosphere 2 showed how much stranger the problem becomes when biology joins the machinery. During its sealed missions in Arizona, oxygen fell even though plants were producing it. Microbes in the rich soil were consuming oxygen, while chemical reactions in the concrete absorbed some of the carbon dioxide those microbes released. The system's own materials helped hide what was happening. That is the awkward part of living inside one loop. A gauge can report a change without explaining its cause. The crew may know that the air is moving in the wrong direction, yet disagree about what to repair first. Is the trouble in the crops, the soil, a wall, a sensor, or several things at once? Those disagreements carry a cost. Spare filters used in one section can't be used somewhere else. Water held for emergencies can't also support a struggling harvest. Shutting down equipment for inspection may protect the future while making life harder today. Even deciding which measurements to trust gives someone power over everyone else. So the people aboard couldn't treat maintenance as plumbing done behind a locked door. They would need public rules for inspections, reserves, rationing, and repairs. They would also need ways to challenge a diagnosis without turning every warning light into a political fight. Trust would depend on open records, skilled workers, and a shared belief that bad news wasn't being softened or concealed. No experiment on Earth can tell us the best form of government for that job. Biosphere 2 can show that hidden chemistry can change the outcome. Space stations can show that careful recovery works. Neither can tell us how thousands of people, living for generations, should divide authority when one repair helps some passengers sooner than others. You would breathe the consequences of decisions made by people you might never meet, and the same shared loop would reach beyond air and water into something larger, slower, and visible at every meal: the land and light required to grow food. Food seems easier because you can stack it on shelves. A sealed packet waits patiently, asks for no sunlight, and never gets aphids. For a voyage lasting a few months, that works beautifully. For a voyage lasting centuries, the shelves would become corridors. The corridors would become warehouses, and the oldest meals would outlive the people who packed them. Calories can last a long time when food is dried, frozen, or sealed away from oxygen. Nutrition is less patient. Vitamins break down. Fats can spoil. Seals and wrappers fail. Radiation and slow chemical changes keep working while the ship crosses the dark. Long-term dried food could provide reserves and variety, but it cannot be the main answer for generation after generation. Then there is simple mass. Every meal stored at departure must be pushed out of Earth's gravity and accelerated with the ship. Add enough food for hundreds or thousands of people year after year, and the pantry starts competing with the engines, shielding, water, and living space. You are no longer packing for a trip. You are trying to preload the harvests of people who haven't been born. So the food supply has to change from inventory into a living system. Crops need light, water, nutrients, growing space, pollination, harvesting, processing, and people who know what to do when leaves turn yellow for no obvious reason. Waste has to return as usable nutrients without bringing disease along with it. Seeds must remain healthy. Fungi, insects, and microbes must be managed, because a greenhouse is also an excellent home for things you didn't invite. Models of shipboard food production make the scale jump rather abruptly. Even a moderate crew can require growing areas that feel less like a greenhouse beside the kitchen and more like the working land of a settlement. Walk past the final shelf of preserved meals, open the greenhouse door, and the corridor keeps going much farther than expected. Diet changes that landscape. Grain, beans, potatoes, vegetables, algae, cultured foods, and animal products place very different demands on mass, land, energy, labor, and water. A richer diet may help health and morale, yet it can also add processing equipment, feed chains, pests, and more links between species. Every extra link gives the crew another job and the ecosystem another way to drift. The exact crop mix is still open. So are the best preservation methods and the amount of emergency food worth carrying. Those choices depend on crew size, available power, ship design, and what people are willing to eat for an entire life. The durable result is simpler. Storage alone cannot feed centuries. Farming becomes unavoidable. Once a pantry turns into a landscape, the next limit is physical. How much farm must the ship actually carry? A greenhouse sounds like one room tucked into the ship. For 500 people, the numbers can make it look more like countryside folded into a hull. One model for an omnivorous crew put the farming area near 0.45 square kilometers. That's about 0.17 square miles, or roughly 63 soccer fields. The estimate isn't a blueprint. Change the crops, the farming method, or the gravity, and the area changes too, but the scale is hard to dismiss. A moderate crew may need a farm the size of a small settlement. Now place that inside a spacecraft. You need decks of growing space, each supplied with water, light, air, and access for workers. Some crops need more height. Others need equipment for planting and harvest. Walkways take room. So do pumps, pipes, storage tanks, repair spaces, seed banks, and the machinery that turns a harvest into meals. The fields may stretch much farther through the ship than anyone expected. The farm also shapes the vessel around it. Wide-growing decks may favor a broad rotating section. Stacked fields may demand strong floors and careful airflow. Artificial lighting adds heat, which has to be carried away. Water has weight. Soil or other growing material has weight. Even empty space between rows becomes part of the ship's mass and structure. Diet changes this geometry. An omnivorous menu can require crops for people and feed for animals, unless meat comes from some other process. Animals also need space, water, ventilation, and waste handling. They add disease and pest risks, along with more species whose needs must stay in balance. The ship gets larger because dinner has more steps. A lighter diet can shorten those chains. More calories go straight from plants to people. That can reduce growing area, water demand, equipment, and labor. It doesn't make food simple. Crews still need enough protein, fat, vitamins, variety, and meals they can bear eating year after year. But the menu is now an engineering decision. Choosing dinner also means choosing decks, pipes, lamps, radiators, and working hours. So the ship isn't merely carrying a greenhouse. It's carrying a compacted countryside, with much of its shape built around feeding the people inside. The exact acreage can move. The settlement scale remains. That is a surprising amount of countryside to hide inside something we still call a ship. And countryside brings chores. Crops must be checked, harvested, replanted, cleaned, processed, and protected every day. Someone has to notice a failing pump before a row of plants notices first. Once food occupies whole decks, farming stops being a hidden system. It becomes part of ordinary life aboard the ship. Harvest day affects far more than the menu. It sets the pace of work across the ship. Vegetables need picking when they're ready. Compost needs turning on schedule. Damaged crops need attention before a small problem spreads. The farm keeps its own calendar, and everyone has to live by it. That calendar is tied to the air. Plants take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen while they have light. In darkness, they use oxygen just as we do. Harvesting a large crop changes that exchange. So does planting the next one. The oxygen curve, lighting schedule, and harvest schedule belong on the same chart. Then there are pests. A closed ship can't spray a field and let wind and rain carry the residue away. Chemicals remain inside the shared environment. Biological controls add living organisms to an ecology that may already be hard to balance. Removing pests by hand avoids some chemical risks, but it adds hours of repetitive work. Every choice leaves someone with a cost. Diet changes this whole arrangement. A menu based on grains, beans, potatoes, and other efficient crops could reduce growing area and equipment mass. It may demand more processing and storage. It may also produce a cuisine shaped by what grows reliably, rather than what you miss from Earth. Fresh fruit, oils, coffee, spices, and animal foods carry very different costs in land, water, energy, and labor. Those costs won't fall evenly. Some people will maintain reactors or repair electrical systems. Others may spend long shifts washing roots, clearing mold, moving compost, or inspecting leaves for insects. Calling every job essential doesn't decide who gets the least pleasant work. It doesn't decide how often jobs rotate, or whether extra burdens earn anything in return. That makes lunch part of the ship's constitution. The menu decides how much space belongs to crops and how many hours belong to farm work. It affects which risks enter the ecology, which comforts survive the voyage, and how much choice each person keeps. An efficient diet may still fail if the crew experiences it as a permanent order written by engineers who don't share the burden. No current model can select one best menu for a voyage like this. Models can compare calories, mass, land, and energy. They can't reliably measure resentment, tradition, appetite, or fairness. Yet those human pressures can decide whether people cooperate with the food system at all. So the farm is recurring work with consequences, not a garden tucked behind a door. Harvest time, compost lines, and oxygen curves meet in one shared calendar. The next pressure falls on automation. How much of that calendar can machines truly take over? A maintenance drone glides between the ship's pipes, checking valves and listening for changes in pumps. It can do that all day without getting bored, tired, or tempted to skip the awkward corner behind a water tank. That is a real advantage. Good automation could handle thousands of routine inspections, adjust lights and temperatures, move supplies, clean equipment, and enter areas that are too hot or dangerous for people. It could notice a slow pressure change long before a crew member hears anything strange. On a Weld chip, those saved hours would add up quickly. But the bargain has a limit. A machine works from sensors, instructions, and patterns learned from earlier conditions. The ship around it will keep changing. Pipes will age. Microbes will settle where nobody expected them. Replacement parts will differ slightly from the originals. A repair made 2 centuries earlier may leave an odd vibration that isn't in any maintenance guide. Then the drone can report an anomaly. It may even suggest a repair. Someone still has to decide whether the reading comes from a failing pump, a dirty sensor, a software error, or a new problem that has never appeared before. World ship feasibility studies keep running into this burden. The systems interact. Water treatment affects farming. Farming affects air. Power limits affect both. A fault in one place can appear as a warning somewhere else. Automation can watch more of those links than any person could, but watching isn't always understanding. Long mission training reaches a similar conclusion from the human side. Greater self-reliance calls for broader competence on board. The farther a crew travels from outside help, the more people need to diagnose problems across specialties. The electrician may need some biology. The doctor may need to understand air recycling. The software specialist may eventually have to repair a physical valve with tools made on board. This doesn't make the machines less valuable. It changes what they're for. They carry repetition, extend attention, and reduce exposure to danger. Humans handle the cases that fall outside the expected pattern. Each side makes the other more capable. There is no established safe ratio of people to machines for a working world ship. We don't know how many technicians, spare systems, or overlapping skills would be enough after generations of wear. Any confident number would depend on technology that hasn't been built and failure records that don't exist. So a mostly automated ship could demand less routine labor while requiring more shared understanding. Convenience and dependence aren't the same thing. And if later generations inherit machines that still work, but no longer understand why they work, the most dangerous failure may begin before any alarm sounds. A ship can operate itself right up to the day it cannot. Then every alarm light may be perfectly accurate, while nobody aboard can explain the whole chain behind it. That's the difference between using a tool and recovering it. You can drive a car for years without knowing how fuel reaches the engine. That's usually fine. A mechanic exists somewhere else. So does a parts factory. So does the engineer who can read the original design. A world ship has no somewhere else. Its software may spot trouble sooner than any person could. It may isolate damaged equipment, switch to a spare, and adjust hundreds of controls in seconds. Those are real strengths. But each automatic response can hide another layer of cause. The crew sees the symptom. The machine handles the first repair. The reason behind the failure slips out of view. Most days, that feels like safety. Over many generations, it can become a trap. People learn which screen to open and which command to approve. They may become excellent operators. Yet a rare fault can cross several systems at once. A cooling problem changes a sensor reading. The sensor triggers bad instructions. Those instructions strain a power unit. Now the crew needs more than a manual for each part. Someone has to follow the failure from beginning to end. World ship feasibility studies keep returning to this burden of reliability. Long mission training work points in the same direction. Greater autonomy doesn't remove the need for skilled people. It spreads that need across more fields. A crew far from Earth must diagnose, repair, improvise, and teach without calling the people who built the system. And the teaching may be the hardest part. The first crew could train beside the designers. Their grandchildren would learn from people who learned from those trainees. Much later, a procedure might survive while its reason disappears. The machine still runs, the checklist still works. Nobody notices what has been lost until the checklist meets a failure it never covered. This doesn't show that simpler machines are always safer. A person can misunderstand a basic pump just as easily as a complex computer. It shows that understanding has to grow with automation. If machines extend what the crew can do, the ship's culture must extend what the crew can explain. That culture is more than keeping technicians on duty. It means letting people open systems, trace decisions, test assumptions, and practice failures before they happen. Knowledge can't belong to one specialist or one generation. It has to be copied through teaching, exercises, diagrams, workshops, and the ordinary habit of asking why a repair worked. That is repair culture, not a ship full of people fixing broken objects all day, but a society that refuses to let its working world become a black box. At first, passengers seem like the point of the voyage, while maintenance sits somewhere behind them. A few skilled engineers handle the machinery, and everyone else gets on with being a society. That arrangement works on a ferry. It becomes dangerous when the ferry has to run for centuries. A world ship can't keep all of its practical knowledge inside a small guild. Too many systems touch one another. A strange smell in a corridor might begin with wiring, air circulation, insulation, or a cleaning fluid. Finding the cause takes inspection first, then diagnosis. The person who notices it may not be an engineer. They still need to recognize that something has changed, describe it clearly, and know when to act. This makes maintenance part of ordinary behavior. People check seals as they pass through a hatch. They notice a pump changing pitch. They record small faults before those faults begin traveling through connected systems. None of this is glamorous. That's rather the point. The ship stays alive because thousands of small observations happen before anyone needs to perform a heroic repair. Spare parts become cultural objects too. They aren't simply boxes on a shelf. The crew has to know what each part fits, how long it lasts, and whether it can be made on board. A spare that nobody can identify is just carefully stored clutter. A replacement made from the wrong material may work beautifully for a week and then fail when it heats, bends, or reacts with something nearby. So repair drills would belong beside fire drills and medical training. Crews could shut down a healthy system, introduce a known fault, and practice finding it. Children might learn calibration and fault finding, much as children on Earth learn road rules. You don't expect every child to become a traffic engineer. You teach them enough to move safely through a shared system and notice when something is wrong. Long mission training points in the same direction. Greater autonomy doesn't reduce the need for understanding on board. It broadens it. When help is years away, more people need overlapping skills, A biologist may need to isolate a faulty sensor. A machinist may need to understand water chemistry. A teacher may also keep repair records clear enough for the next crew to use. Skills will never be distributed evenly. Some people will remain far better at reactor controls, medicine, or fabrication. The danger is a narrow bottleneck where one team, family, or generation holds knowledge that nobody else can recover. The vessel is only as smart as the culture that keeps learning how it works, and that leaves a slower task beneath every repair, teaching the next generation to inherit the habit rather than only the manual. A ship's library might contain flawless instructions for welding a cracked pipe. It can name the alloy, the current, the angle, and every safety check. But the book can't feel the metal begin to behave differently under the torch. It can't notice a hand moving too fast, and it can't lean over and say, "Stop, try that again." And that difference seems small until the pipe carries water, oxygen, or coolant. Knowing where the instructions are is not the same as making a sound weld in a cramped space. The welder needs hours of practice. Bad joints must be cut open and examined. An experienced person has to catch mistakes while they can still be corrected. Some knowledge sits on a page. Some only becomes usable after the hands, eyes, and judgment have worked together many times. Medicine has the same problem. A doctor can read the steps of an emergency procedure in minutes. Performing it on a frightened patient, while alarms sound and two other things go wrong, is a different kind of knowing. Diagnosis is even less obedient. The symptoms may be incomplete. The sensor may be wrong. The patient may describe pain in an unexpected way. A reference can offer possibilities. It cannot supply the practiced judgment that tells you which clue deserves attention first. NASA has already run into a smaller version of this problem. Its reviews of training for long missions have found that today's approach takes a great deal of time and does not scale well. Astronauts train intensely before launch. Even then, skills can fade. Crews need refreshers, practice sessions, and help from people on Earth. Researchers are still working out how to preserve competence when missions become longer and the range of required skills grows. A voyage lasting generations makes that difficulty far larger. You cannot train one crew before departure and call the problem solved. People born aboard will need skills their teachers may rarely use. A serious medical emergency might happen once in 20 years. A certain repair may not be needed for half a lifetime. That is good news for the patients and the machinery. It is terrible news for practice. Emergency response fades in the same ordinary way. A checklist can tell a crew where to seal a compartment. But during a drill, people discover that a storage cart blocks the hatch. A radio cannot be heard through a suit, or two teams both expect the other to close a valve. Those lessons do not appear by reading harder. They appear when people rehearse, make errors, and change the procedure. None of this makes the archive unimportant. A well-kept library may preserve designs, case histories, failed repairs, and techniques that no living person remembers fully. Without it, each generation would have to recover too much from scratch. The archive holds the reference. The culture turns that reference back into ability. So the simulator room beside the library cannot stay empty for long. Neither can the workshop, clinic, or emergency drill deck. People must practice before the skill is needed. Their work must be observed. Mistakes must be safe enough to learn from, yet realistic enough to expose weak judgment. Teachers must also train new teachers, because skill can disappear when one gifted person dies without passing on how they noticed trouble. You may know exactly which book could save the ship and still be unable to do what it says. The next problem is building a training system that keeps rare, difficult skills alive across centuries, including during the long stretches when nobody needs them for real. Education can look like something a ship does after its essential work is finished. But on a generation ship, the classroom is one of the places keeping the air breathable. The lesson may not look much like school. A simulator bay has bookings, maintenance checks, and waiting lists. One crew practices a coolant leak. Another works through a power failure that cuts the lights in 3 compartments. Medical trainees handle a patient who exists only inside a machine. Nobody wants these events to happen. That's why people rehearse them on ordinary days, between meal shifts and inspections. Space agencies already spend heavily on preparation. For missions in the International Space Station era, training time can reach roughly 10 hours for every hour of mission time. That ratio includes many demands of flying from Earth, so it cannot simply be copied onto a ship. Still, it exposes the scale of the problem. Even a mission lasting months can require years of instruction, rehearsal, and assessment. Stretch the mission across centuries, and the old arrangement breaks. A ship cannot spend 10 years preparing every person for 1 year of useful work. It also cannot send everyone back to Earth for another course. The teachers, test equipment, mock-ups, records, and standards must all travel with the crew. Training becomes a system the ship has to operate continuously. And learning something once is not enough. Skills fade when they sit unused. You can read a panel every morning and still freeze when 3 alarms arrive together. Knowing which control to touch is different from recognizing that the control itself is giving you bad information. That deeper judgment comes from repetition, correction, and seeing failures in more than one form. Research on training for long missions keeps running into this problem. We know people forget procedures. We know refreshers can help. We also know that long gaps, changing equipment, stress, and limited contact with experts make retention harder. Studies can compare methods over months or a few years. They cannot prove that one curriculum will preserve a technical culture for 300 years. So the ship needs institutions that call people back before anyone feels rusty. A medic may return to surgery practice every few weeks. A reactor technician may face a simulated fault each month. Someone watches, records what went wrong, and changes the next drill. Rehearsal has a schedule, because waiting for a real emergency would be a dreadful way to discover that everyone forgot step 4. Cross-training adds another layer. The person who maintains water pumps may also learn basic electrical repair. A nurse may know enough laboratory work to cover an illness or injury. This doesn't make everyone an expert in everything. It gives the crew more than one path through a bad week. One broken wrist should not remove the only person able to keep a life support system running. The difficult part is protecting depth. Modern interfaces can guide a capable operator through common tasks. They cannot guarantee that someone understands a rare failure hidden beneath those tasks. A ship may go 40 years without needing a certain kind of repair. Then, on one unremarkable morning, that old skill may decide whether a compartment stays habitable. That is why people keep returning to the simulator bays. They rehearse futures they hope never arrive. Most sessions end with the lights coming back on, the false patient recovering, and everyone going to dinner. The routine feels almost boring, which is a sign that it has found its proper place. But some abilities are too rare, too delicate, or too slow to rebuild through occasional drills. Those are the skills the ship must guard most carefully. A ship under pressure seems to need one thing above all: command. Someone sets the course, assigns the work, and makes the hard call when alarms begin. That structure can settle an emergency. It cannot, by itself, govern everything people share. Everyone aboard is living inside the same limited pool. The air in one compartment joins the air everywhere else. Water used today must be cleaned for tomorrow. Energy sent to one system is unavailable to another. A labor slot filled in the greenhouse cannot also be filled in the clinic. Fertility timing affects schools, housing, food, and the age of the future crew. Repair bandwidth spent on a worn pump may delay work on a failing sensor. These resources have an awkward feature. People need them together, but every use leaves less capacity somewhere else. Economists call that subtractable. On the ship, it means your private choice can become someone else's shortage. A council table might sit beside live graphs of oxygen, births, power, and maintenance backlogs. The graphs show physical limits. The council decides how people must live within them. In that room, rules become as material as pipes. A bad rule can damage the ship as surely as a bad valve. Researcher Eleanor Ostrom spent decades studying communities that managed shared resources without relying only on private ownership or distant command. She looked at forests, fisheries, and irrigation systems. The successful groups differed, but several patterns appeared again and again. People knew who could use the resource. They helped shape rules suited to local conditions. Use was monitored. Penalties usually began small and grew with repeated abuse. Disputes had somewhere cheap and practical to go. Rules could change when conditions changed. A generation ship is stranger than any village or fishery, yet those problems remain familiar. Who receives extra water during pregnancy? Who may draw emergency power for an experiment? Who gets certified to authorize a repair that could shut down half the ship? Who loses priority when the maintenance backlog grows? A captain can issue answers. That still doesn't make the answers durable. If the rules seem arbitrary, people learn to hide use, trade favors, or manipulate the records. A water allowance becomes a status marker. A repair queue becomes political currency. Even a sensible rule can fail when people believe it protects one family or profession at everyone else's expense. Fairness here isn't a pleasant extra. It changes whether the system works. People are more likely to obey limits they can see, challenge, and revise. They're also more likely to report waste when enforcement applies to powerful people too. That doesn't mean every decision requires a vote. A fire crew cannot pause for public debate. Medical authority may need firm boundaries. Some technical controls should remain beyond casual interference. The ship can keep hierarchy for moments that demand speed while using shared rulemaking for the long allocation of common resources. Commons theory cannot supply a finished constitution for a society no one has built. It does identify the pressures that constitution must survive. Boundaries must be clear. Records must be trusted. Appeals must exist. Authority must be visible, limited, and competent. And because the pool changes with every birth, breakdown, harvest, and repair, yesterday's fair rule may become tomorrow's dangerous one. Everyone is still breathing the same air and drawing from the same reserve, so stability begins with something less dramatic than command, deciding what must be measured, who gets to see it, and what happens when the numbers stop matching the rules. Good people with a strong mission can govern themselves for a while. Ship life gets harder when two good people need the same repair slot, and only one can have it. The queue is more than a schedule. It decides whose failing water pump gets attention first. The ration ledger does more than count meals. It shows who used extra water, why they used it, and who approved the choice. If you can trace those decisions, a delay may be frustrating without feeling rigged. That difference can keep people alive. Air, water, electrical power, fertile soil, spare parts, and working hours are shared resources. One person's use leaves less for someone else. Researchers call resources like these a commons. Eleanor Ostrom spent decades studying communities that managed shared forests, fisheries, and irrigation systems without simply ruining them or handing everything to a distant authority. Those communities were never perfect. Still, the ones that lasted often shared a few practical habits. They knew who belonged to the group and what resource the rules covered. They made use visible. People affected by the rules could tell whether others were following them. When someone broke a rule, the response usually began small. A warning might come before a lost privilege. A repeated or dangerous offense could bring a stronger penalty. And when people disagreed, they had some affordable way to settle it before the conflict consumed the community. A ship would need the same basic structure. Suppose Mara takes a maintenance slot to inspect a noisy fan. Arun's water purifier is already running below capacity, and his repair request was filed first. If the queue is hidden, Arun sees favoritism. If the queue shows that the fan cools the battery room, he can see why it moved ahead. He may still object. That's where appeal enters the machinery. The appeal cannot require months of hearings or access to a powerful friend. It must be quick enough for ship life. Perhaps a rotating panel reviews the maintenance record and hears both sides. Perhaps it confirms the decision or restores Arun's place at the front of the next queue. The procedure costs time, but unresolved resentment costs more. Monitoring has the same ordinary purpose. A water meter is not an accusation, neither is a signed tool log. They let the crew distinguish a leak from theft, a mistake from deception, and one bad choice from a repeated pattern. Without that evidence, every shortage invites rumor. Punishment also has to fit the offense. Someone who forgets to log a shower should not be treated like someone who secretly bypasses a water limit. If every violation brings the harshest response, people hide mistakes. If none brings a response, careful people begin to wonder why they are sacrificing at all. Graduated sanctions leave room for correction while protecting the shared supply. No set of rules can guarantee justice. Monitors can lie, panels can favor friends, records can be wrong. But invisible rules and arbitrary penalties turn fairness into a physical risk. People stop reporting errors, they work around the queue, they conceal extra use, compliance falls, and the ship loses resources it cannot replace. Fairness is not decoration added after the engineering works. It affects whether the engineering keeps working. During normal life, we can use ledgers, appeals, warnings, and review. A fire in the oxygen plant cannot wait for a panel to meet. Someone must take command, close doors, cut power, and order people out. So how can emergency authority act that quickly without becoming the ship's normal form of government? The corridor looks exactly the same on day 200 as it did on day 2. By day 500, even the familiar scuff beside the airlock may feel like part of a loop nobody can leave. A crew can believe deeply in its mission and still begin to fray. Purpose helps, but it doesn't create new faces, fresh rooms, or an afternoon away from everyone else. It can't shorten a message delay. It can't make the walls move farther apart. Mars 500 gave researchers a controlled look at this kind of pressure. 6 men entered a sealed facility in Moscow in 2010 and stayed there for 520 days. The mission copied parts of a Mars voyage, including confinement, limited supplies, and delayed communication. Nobody was actually crossing space. Still, their daily world became small, repetitive, and hard to escape. The crew didn't simply become sadder each day. Their behavior changed in different ways and at different times. Some became less active. Sleep patterns shifted. Crew members spent more waking time alone. One participant developed signs of mild depression, while another had trouble with sleep and alertness. The group remained functional, but functional isn't the same as untouched. NASA's behavioral health work has found the same broad warning in other isolated settings. Strain often comes in cycles. Researchers have described a third-quarter pattern in polar stations and space analogues. After the excitement of the beginning has faded, but before the end feels close, mood and cooperation can worsen. It makes ordinary sense. At first, every routine is new. Later, the finish becomes a real date you can count toward. Between those points sits a long stretch with neither novelty nor release. The work continues, the corridor repeats, and small habits become impossible to ignore. There may be no dramatic argument. Someone just stops joining meals. Another person answers more sharply. A minor noise becomes unbearable because it has happened at the same hour for 8 months. One crewmate wants conversation after work. Another has spent the whole day longing to hear no human voice at all. Both reactions are reasonable. They also occupy the same few rooms. That is why the long middle becomes an engineering problem. Isolation changes behavior through monotony, communication delay, crowding, and the loss of an outside reset. On Earth, a strained team can go home, friends can visit, a new manager can arrive. Even a walk through another neighborhood interrupts the pattern. A distant crew may have none of those pressure valves. Ritual can help because it gives time a shape. Shared meals, private routines, celebrations, and regular changes in duty can separate one week from the next. Meaningful work helps too, especially when people can see that their choices have real effects. Busy work is easier to recognize than planners sometimes expect. But the analog evidence has limits. Mars 500 was a short experiment beside a voyage lasting generations. Its crew was small, screened, and always knew an outside world was waiting. These studies don't prove that a generation ship must break into hostile groups. They show that stress follows patterns, even among capable people who chose the mission and wanted it to succeed. So belief can't carry the whole load. Surviving the long middle requires space for withdrawal, without treating withdrawal as betrayal. It requires routines that mark time without making every day identical, and it requires accepting one slightly awkward fact. Sometimes the kindest thing a ship can give you is a door that closes. How much privacy can its architecture provide? On a ship where every room serves several purposes, a private cabin can look wasteful. It takes volume, adds doors and wiring, and gives one person space that nobody else can use. But that little room does real work. Inside it, you can stop performing for the crew. You can be angry without spreading anger across the dining table. You can cry, sleep, read, or stare at a wall without anyone deciding that your mood needs investigation. For a while, the ship is no longer watching. Analog missions have repeatedly shown why this helps. In isolated crews, people often cope by pulling back from one another. That withdrawal isn't always a failure. Sometimes the brain is lowering the amount of social information it must process. The trouble begins when there's nowhere to withdraw except inward, while the same voices, faces, and small irritations remain present all day. A closed door gives that pressure somewhere physical to go. Sound insulation helps. So does control over light, temperature, and personal objects. These details let a person make one small piece of the habitat feel like theirs, not forever and not without rules, but enough to recover a sense of control. Privacy also prevents ordinary conflict from becoming public theatre. If every disagreement happens in a shared room, an argument quickly draws other people in. People choose sides. Pride gets involved. A minor complaint about a cleaning rota can harden into a dispute between families. Give people somewhere to cool down, and the same complaint may remain exactly what it was, an annoying Tuesday. The calendar needs similar engineering. Meals at known times, regular days away from routine duties, birthdays, memorials, games, music, and shared ceremonies all divide an endless voyage into pieces people can live through. A ritual doesn't need to be solemn. It might be a monthly meal made from ingredients saved for the occasion, or a ridiculous tournament whose rules have been argued over for 80 years. These habits do more than relieve boredom. They tell the crew when effort is expected and when it can stop. They create safe occasions for grief, celebration, and repair. They also carry identity across generations. A child born aboard may never see an ocean or stand beneath open weather, but that child can still inherit a yearly ceremony, learn why it exists, and later change it. Recreation has to offer more than passive distraction. People need activities that build skill, invite choice, and produce something worth sharing. A workshop, garden, rehearsal room, or sports space can return a kind of agency that scheduled labor removes. Even losing a game can be healthy when the loss has no effect on oxygen supplies. None of this eliminates conflict. Some people will still retreat too far. Some rituals will become stale or exclusionary. Shared events can create pressure of their own, especially when attendance is treated as proof of loyalty. The ship must allow people to join, refuse, and return without turning every absence into suspicion. That makes walls and calendars part of emotional survival. They regulate exposure. They mark changes in time. They help people come back to one another before resentment reaches the machinery everyone depends on. And then a harder problem appears. A cabin with a locking door is valuable precisely because privacy is scarce. So who receives the larger rooms? Who gets the quieter shift, the better recreation time, or permission to be alone when labor is short? Once relief is designed into the ship, fairness decides who can reach it. Harsh conditions can make people cooperate, but they don't make rank disappear. On a world ship, inequality may have less to do with money than with who gets access to the rooms where futures are assigned. One district might have cleaner air, quieter cabins, and better ventilation. That difference already affects sleep, health, and patience. But suppose the same district also supplies most of the ship's engineers, its children receive better schooling, they meet the senior technicians, they enter apprenticeships that other children rarely hear about until the places are filled. Privilege then travels farther than comfort. It reaches into technical knowledge, trusted roles, and the authority to decide who is qualified. The people with better air also gain better odds of controlling the machines that provide everyone else's air. You can see the trap. Life support requires years of training. The ship can't hand reactor controls to anyone who asks, yet if one group controls the training, it can present inherited advantage as necessary competence. The requirement may be real, the path to meeting it may still be unfair. Worldship ethics often begins with shared dependence. Every generation inherits a vessel it didn't build, along with duties it never personally accepted. Commons theory adds another concern. When everyone depends on one shared system, rules must be seen as fair enough to earn cooperation. If access to skill and authority passes through a few families, that trust can wear thin. This is a company town that also owns the atmosphere. Your employer doesn't merely control your wages or housing. It may control your education, your work assignment, your medical clearance, and the record that says whether your child can train for a critical role. Leaving isn't an option. There is no neighboring town and no rival institution across the road. Family planning makes the problem sharper. A closed ship may have strict population limits. Births affect food, water, space, and oxygen for decades. Some form of reproductive planning may therefore be unavoidable, but permission can become another choke point. If senior families receive exceptions, or if only approved occupations qualify for children, a temporary rule can begin sorting the population by lineage. None of this proves that every worldship becomes a caste society. Rules can be reviewed, training can be opened, apprenticeships can be assigned by transparent methods, reproductive limits can apply equally and allow appeals. People are capable of building institutions that correct inherited advantage. The danger lies in drift. A technical role passes from parent to child because early teaching happens at home. That family gains influence because it holds rare knowledge. Its influence wins better living conditions, which improve health and education. Soon the group appears more capable because the ship has spent generations making it more capable. Meanwhile, talent elsewhere goes unused. A gifted child in a poorly ventilated district may be too tired to excel, too disconnected to find a mentor, or excluded by an old family record. The hierarchy then harms more than fairness. It weakens the ship by narrowing the pool of people prepared to repair it. Under confinement, conflict already has fewer places to go. Add unequal air, unequal schooling, and unequal permission to form a family, and resentment attaches itself to survival itself. Over time, the question is no longer who owns more. It is who may learn, who may serve, who may have children, and whose descendants are expected to obey. That is how a necessary division of labor can harden into caste. Specialization sounds harmless because every working society needs it. You want a trained surgeon handling an operation. You want a skilled engineer checking the air system. The trouble begins when expertise gets confused with exclusive control over who may become an expert. Consider a child who could grow into an excellent surgeon. She has the patience, memory, and steady hands for it. But there may be only 12 medical training places that year. If one institution assigns those places, its rules decide whether her ability ever reaches the operating room. A credential can protect patients from an untrained doctor. It can also protect a favored group from competition. The same doorway serves both purposes. On Earth, a blocked student can sometimes try another school, another city, or another profession. A worldship may offer no second route. There may be one clinic, one engineering academy, and one authority approving advanced training. Scarcity turns each pathway into a bottleneck. If access follows family ties, factional loyalty, or inherited status, that bottleneck can last for generations. The harm compounds with time. The people denied training never gain the experience required for senior roles. Their children then grow up without professional contacts, informed guidance, or instructors who recognize their ability. Meanwhile, the families already inside the system learn how its decisions are made. No single rule has to mention birth. The result can still become hereditary. Permissions create the same risk. A role may require security clearance because the equipment is dangerous. Reproductive decisions may be limited because food, space, and medical care are finite. Those limits can begin as practical rules, but if the people granting permission come from the same small circle, temporary control starts protecting itself. They choose the next doctors, engineers, officials, and parents. Those people then inherit the power to choose again. This is why mobility belongs inside the ship's survival system. Think of circulating water through every section instead of drawing forever from one small tank. A society needs capable people moving into life support roles from across the population. Training places must reopen. Credentials must be reviewable. Positions must pass to qualified newcomers rather than familiar successors. Without that movement, talent sits unused while authority reproduces itself. The ship may still function for years, its equipment may pass inspection, its clinics may remain open. Yet the pool of trusted experts grows narrower and mistakes become harder to challenge. A closed profession can miss the person most able to repair it. Research on durable institutions points to two connected pressures. People cooperate more readily when rules seem fair, stable, and open to scrutiny. They withdraw trust when freedom depends on pleasing whoever controls a scarce resource. Direct evidence from multi-generational ships is thin because no such society has completed the experiment. But the institutional mechanism is familiar. Control the doorway long enough, and control over a task becomes control over a class of people. The result needn't resemble a dramatic dictatorship. It may look like ordinary paperwork. One family knows how applications are judged. One faction supplies most instructors. A child from the wrong district misses an early qualification and can never catch up. Appeals exist, but the same circle hears them. Each decision appears defensible alone. Together, they close the future. You can ask people to accept unequal duties when movement remains possible. It's much harder to demand obedience when birth decides which doors will ever open. That society loses more than goodwill. It loses capable surgeons, engineers, and officials. It also teaches everyone outside the favored circle that effort cannot change their place. Eventually, descendants may stop treating the founders as rightful authors of their lives. The ship left Earth under one political agreement. After several generations, who still owes that agreement obedience? Arrival sounds like the point where the old mission is finally completed. The engines slow, a new world fills the windows, and the descendants carry out the promise made on Earth. But the people standing in that council chamber are not the people who made the promise. The founders chose to leave. Their consent could never be perfect, since nobody knew every danger ahead. Still, they boarded with some idea of the voyage, its purpose, and its cost. The shipborn made no such choice. They entered the mission by being born inside it. That difference does not erase the founders' hopes. It does not make every inherited duty unfair, either. We all inherit laws, debts, institutions, and unfinished work. A generation ship cannot ask each newborn whether life support should continue. Some obligations come with keeping everyone alive. Arrival changes the kind of obligation involved. During the voyage, maintaining the ship protects a shared home. At the destination, the old mission may demand something new, leaving that home, settling an uncertain planet, and accepting risks chosen centuries earlier. By then, the oldest oath from Earth may hang on the council wall as a historical text. Some people may still treat it as binding. Their families kept the ship alive because they believed the destination gave each sacrifice meaning. To abandon settlement at the last moment could feel like breaking faith with the dead. Others may read the same oath differently. Earth is a place they know through records. The ship is where their grandparents lived, where their children were born, and where every working system has a familiar failure mode. You can understand why a strange planet might not feel like home, even when it fills the windows. It may be beautiful. It may also contain chemistry, weather, microbes, or geological hazards the founders never knew about. So the arrival generation faces a choice the founders could not make for them in full. Should they land? Should they remain aboard while sending probes? Should some settle while others keep the ship operating? And who has the authority to decide? A command structure built for navigation may not deserve control over settlement. A captain can choose how to avoid a collision. That does not automatically give the captain the right to assign land, set permanent laws, or compel families to descend. Continuity has to earn legitimacy again. The founders can leave purposes, records, and reasons. They cannot leave permanent consent on behalf of people who do not yet exist. That does not prove the mission should be abandoned. It means the people carrying its risks must have a real part in renewing it. Home and mission may once have meant the same thing. At arrival, they can split apart. And if the destination is less safe than Earth once hoped, that split becomes impossible to ignore. The first survey maps arrive as glowing shapes across a screen. After generations of travel, the people studying them may discover that the old destination and the actual world are not quite the same place. Some readings will match what Earth expected, others may not. The atmosphere could behave differently across seasons. Radiation may be stronger in certain regions, water may be harder to reach. The safest ground may offer poor access to energy. Even a suitable planet can contain local hazards that no distant telescope could resolve before launch. This is planetary uncertainty. It doesn't mean the destination must be hostile. It means the final facts arrive with the final generation, not with the founders. That changes the mission. A landing plan written centuries earlier was based on limited measurements and old engineering forecasts. The ship itself may also have changed. It may have fewer working landers, different medical needs, or a population larger than expected. A settlement that once seemed practical may now demand risks the founders never had to face. So mission revision becomes unavoidable. The people on board may need to choose between landing, remaining in orbit, waiting for better surveys, or dividing into groups. None of those choices is automatically right. No source can tell them that orbit is always safer, or that landing always fulfills the mission. The evidence only tells them that a real decision may still be open. And the people making it were born inside a project they didn't personally choose. They inherited its destination, its machines, and many of its dangers. That partial lack of consent doesn't erase every duty they have to one another. It does weaken the claim that an old instruction must be obeyed simply because it survived the trip. You can feel the awkwardness here. Everyone may agree that reaching the planet was the purpose. They may still disagree about what reaching it requires. One group may see delay as caution, another may see it as surrender. Some may want to descend at once. Others may refuse to place their children on ground that has barely been tested. A mission can survive every mechanical failure and still break at this point. If nobody has a legitimate way to revise the plan, authority may fall back on rank, inherited office, or control of the landers. Then arrival becomes a struggle over who can force whose future. Reaching the destination is therefore not a ceremonial finish line. It reopens the mission because the facts have changed, and because the people living with those facts must judge them for themselves. The ship needs more than landing procedures. It needs an arrival constitution, rules for new evidence, delay, descent, shared authority, and decisions the founders could never make in advance. An arrival constitution would be a document written for people who cannot yet use most of it. Its clauses might remain locked for generations. They become active only when the destination is close enough to study, and the old promise becomes a set of real choices. That delay is the point. The last crew cannot be expected to invent fair rules while a planet fills the windows, probes return mixed results, and every week of waiting consumes supplies. Good people can still make terrible decisions under that pressure. Some will want to land, some will want more tests. Others may want to leave the system entirely. Everyone will know that delay has a cost. The Constitution would set revision thresholds before that pressure arrives. A landing order might require more than a simple majority. Changing the final destination might require a larger vote, held twice, with time between votes. A decision risking everyone could face a higher threshold than one affecting a single landing group. It would also define what counts as evidence. One probe result should not outweigh years of conflicting measurements merely because it arrived last. Sensor failures would need review. Medical, ecological, and engineering teams would have to show their methods. When experts disagree, their disagreement would remain in the record. You would know what was measured, what was inferred, and what remained unknown. Then come the rules for descent. A minority might delay its own landing without stopping everyone else. People could appeal a decision, demand an independent review, or form a separate settlement if resources permit. There would be limits too. Nobody gets an endless veto over oxygen, food, or reactor safety. Disagreement needs room, but the ship still has to function. This makes constitutional preparation part of life support. It stops a political fight from flowing straight into control of the engines, landers, air system, or food stores. The document cannot prevent anger or guarantee acceptance. It can only give conflict somewhere to go before people reach for the machinery. The people using it never agreed to the original mission. They inherited the ship, the destination, and the risks. What they can reasonably inherit is a procedure for changing course. We cannot give them unlimited freedom because the vessel still has physical limits, but they need enough authority to judge new facts and refuse decisions made centuries before their birth. That may produce an awkward result. The descendants who arrive together may not agree to remain one society. Some may land, some may stay aboard, others may choose another world in the same system, taking their share of tools, records, and stored life. An arrival constitution must therefore govern more than one landing. It must explain how one ship can become several communities without turning separation into sabotage or war. A shared destination can keep people moving in the same direction without making them live the same way. On a large ship, unity may look less like one community and more like several towns sharing an engine. The ship's map would begin to show it. One district sits near the farms, where days follow planting cycles and harvest alarms. Another grows around the machine shops, where noise, repairs, and shift changes shape daily life. Families near the medical decks may know different risks and routines. People who maintain the outer hull could spend weeks apart from those teaching children near the center. At first, these are practical differences. Then they become social ones. People eat at different hours. They trade favors within familiar circles. Children grow up hearing different stories about which work carries the mission. A repair crew may prize quick decisions because a leaking pipe won't wait for debate. A farming district may favor patience because crops punish rushed choices. Neither group has forgotten the destination. They've simply learned different ways of surviving the trip. Studies of isolated crews suggest that small groups form even when everyone begins with the same official purpose. People cluster around jobs, friendships, habits, and shared frustrations. In polar stations and other confined settings, those lines can harden when privacy is scarce or workloads feel unequal. The group still functions, but it no longer experiences itself as one smooth social unit. Scale adds another pressure. Rules that feel fair in a crew of 30 may feel remote in a population of thousands. If every garden schedule, school dispute, or workshop rule must pass through one central council, people spend more time seeking permission than solving local problems. They may also stop trusting decisions made by representatives who rarely enter their district. Research on shared resources points toward a more flexible arrangement. Communities often manage common supplies better when local users can help set local rules. They still need wider agreements for resources that cross every boundary. Air, water, power, navigation, and hull safety cannot become private neighborhood concerns. Your district can choose its meal hours. It cannot vote to ignore an oxygen leak. That produces something like a federation. Local councils handle local life. Ship-wide institutions protect the systems everyone depends on. Professional groups may also need a formal voice, especially when their knowledge carries unusual risk. Engineers should not rule the ship simply because the engines are important, but a council should not overrule an engine warning because the repair schedule is unpopular. There will be awkward cases, A district built around strict rationing may resent one with looser customs. A religious community may ask for schools that preserve its beliefs. A generation raised near the farms may treat the ship as a living home, while navigation crews still speak of it as transport. Those differences can produce conflict. They can also produce art, loyalty, new customs, and several workable versions of a good life. Isolation research cannot prove that such branching will remain peaceful. It only tells us that forced sameness is a poor measure of success. Suppressing every subgroup may create more danger than recognizing them, because grievances don't vanish when their names are forbidden. The design problem, then, is not how to preserve one culture unchanged. It is how to let many social worlds grow without allowing any one of them to damage the shared vessel. Unity means protecting the common systems and settling disputes without violence. Coherence means the parts can still work together. One hull can hold both, but only if its society is built in modules, much like the ship itself. A modular society would feel less like a single town and more like several neighborhoods sharing the same power station. Each district could run its schools, celebrations, work schedules, and family customs differently. Beneath those local rules, every charter would carry the same life support covenant. No district gets to poison the water, damage the hull, or shut off another district's air. That isn't a retreat from cooperation. It's a way to make cooperation possible when thousands of people no longer agree on everything. Small groups can often manage shared resources through trust and repeated contact. People know who keeps taking extra water. They know who repairs the pumps and who skips the maintenance shift. But as a group grows, those personal checks weaken. The population also becomes less alike. Different neighborhoods may face different shortages, develop different habits, and accept different trade-offs. Commons research gives no single blueprint for handling that pressure. It does suggest that shared resources are easier to protect when rules fit local conditions and when local groups connect through larger institutions. On a world ship, that could mean district councils handling daily life, while a federal council guards the systems nobody can divide. Air, water, power, navigation, the vessel's stored knowledge. The arrangement resembles the ship's engineering. One enormous electrical circuit would be dangerously fragile. A fault could travel through the whole system. Separate circuits contain damage, while shared controls keep them working together. Social modules could do something similar. A bitter school dispute in one district wouldn't need to become a ship-wide constitutional crisis. Local rules could absorb it, provided those rules stayed within the common covenant. Isolation studies offer a smaller and far less demanding comparison. Crews living together for months often form subgroups. They gather by language, profession, friendship, or routine. Those divisions aren't automatically dangerous. Trouble grows when groups lose fair ways to speak, appeal decisions, or reach the resources they share. The social structure and the physical structure remain coupled. If one district controls a critical oxygen line, local autonomy has become power over everyone else. So autonomy would need limits. A district might choose its own calendar, but not ignore hull inspections. It might set local work customs, but not conceal water use. Federal institutions would need enough authority to protect survival systems, yet not so much that every disagreement gets dragged upward and settled by force. There may also be times when branching becomes physical. A growing settlement could divide into two linked habitats, or a daughter vessel could leave with its own charter. That sounds like separation because it is. But separation can be planned. Resources can be divided openly. Travel and communication can remain available. The choice needn't begin with enemies and barricades. Sometimes two groups stay cooperative because neither must control the other's daily life. No experiment tells us the ideal number of districts, the right voting system, or how much authority belongs at each level. A ship's size, technology, and population would change the answer. Any federal design could still fail through corruption, unequal access, or simple bad luck. But rigid sameness carries its own risk. It turns ordinary differences into threats against the mission. Modularity gives those differences somewhere to live. the society can bend locally without breaking everywhere. A closed civilization doesn't survive because everyone remains identical. It survives because people who disagree can still protect the air, share the water, repair the hull, and accept rules that stop one community's freedom from becoming another community's disaster. The strongest unity may be the kind that leaves room inside it. The child in that corridor has never stood under an open sky. She knows Earth through recordings, lessons, and the stories of people who died before she was born. To her, the ship isn't a vehicle carrying society, it is society. That changes the answer to our original problem. A generation ship doesn't survive because its builders packed enough supplies. No storehouse can hold centuries of fresh air, clean water, food, spare parts, trust, and good judgment. Those things must be made again and again by people who inherited the work. The air loop offers the simplest example. Machines pull carbon dioxide from the cabin and return oxygen to the crew. Filters clog, seals crack, sensors drift. Someone must notice, understand the warning, and know what to do next. Then that person must teach someone younger, who will teach another person years later. The farm depends on the same chain. Seeds alone won't feed a population. Farmers must manage light, water, nutrients, pests, and failing equipment inside a closed space. A bad harvest can't be covered by imports. A lost growing method can't be looked up by calling Earth for help. Knowledge has to remain alive in human hands. Births belong to that system too. The population can't grow without limit, but it also can't shrink until essential skills disappear. Every decision touches real families, who may have children, when and under what rules. A plan that works on paper may still fail if people no longer accept the authority enforcing it. And that is why the arrival vote carries so much weight. The people who reach the destination didn't choose to leave Earth. Their ancestors did. After centuries aboard, they may see the target world as dangerous, unwanted, or simply less familiar than home. Technical command alone can't make that decision legitimate. The living passengers must have a real voice in what happens to their lives. So the ship's hardest system isn't hidden behind a wall panel. It lives in classrooms, workshops, family rules, elections, arguments, and the daily habit of repairing what everyone shares. Culture becomes a kind of operating system. It connects the farm to the school, the air loop to the repair crew, and technical authority to public consent. But culture also wears down. Skills can become ritual. Rules can protect powerful families. Necessary limits can turn into control for its own sake. A society may keep the machinery running while losing the agreement that made its authority acceptable. We don't know whether humans can prevent that for centuries. No country, station, or settlement has tested this exact burden. History shows that institutions can last a long time. It also shows that they change, fracture, and sometimes preserve the rule while forgetting its purpose. The corridor child will grow up inside that uncertainty. Perhaps she'll maintain the water system. Perhaps she'll teach navigation. Perhaps she'll cast a vote on arrival. Whatever her role, she'll receive more than a machine from the people before her. She'll receive duties, limits, knowledge, and a reason for continuing. That is what remains when the easy version falls away. A generation ship is a civilization in transit. Its engines must keep firing, but its people must keep rebuilding competence, fairness, and shared purpose as each generation passes. The voyage ends only if enough of them keep choosing that work, including those who never chose the voyage itself. Whether any culture can do that for long enough is still unknown, and somewhere in the same corridor, another child walks beneath the pipes, learning how to keep a world alive.